We live in crazy times. We hear this almost continually, echoed every day from every corner of society. Scientists, media, political pundits, parents, children, crazy conspiratist uncles, all of them are saying the same thing. Look at the pace of modern life. Everything's moving so fast these days. Look at the exponential acceleration of technology, the political polarization, the hypersensitivity. Look at internet, a mere 30 years old. Look how it changes our businesses, our relationships, our education. Look at how it informs and misinforms with such terrifying speed. Why do we feel so hyper-stimulated? Is it a simple constant of human psychology, something by which we've always been afflicted? Or is the world truly stranger? Are things truly moving faster than they were before? Well, the short answer is yes. Things are most definitely strange. When looking at the scope of human history, or the history of life itself, we see that things change by slow degrees over hundreds of thousands, over millions of years. There are spikes, of course. Accelerated extinction or accelerated evolution tends to come about with sudden environmental changes like ice ages, dry spells, meteors, and so on. But in general, as we look around, we see that all other animals are biologically attuned to their environment. There's no reason to expect they will fundamentally change their way of life all that soon, unless that change is forced by humans. Humans, on the other hand, have unlocked a few unprecedented and incredibly powerful abilities, which seem to be exponentializing our rate of advancement. Why are we so different, and what makes us, us? Well, some surprising portion of it has to do with sex, among other things. Let's look at the timeline of human history. Somewhere beyond 3 million years ago, we are still tree dwellers in Africa, one of a family of ancestral primates from which we will soon branch off. We are social, sharing food and child rearing, protecting tribal territory. We are also sexually dimorphic. Females invest an incredible amount in childbearing. It leaves them comparatively vulnerable. Males are therefore chosen for their ability to protect and to provide. The few strongest males can procreate with dozens and dozens of females at a time, while each female can only nurse a single baby, sometimes two. The weaker males are therefore expendable, which magnifies the male role as warrior, hunter, provider. Women are vital in the survival of the species. Males, well, only the powerful are needed, really. Naturally, evolution selects male DNA for things like aggression, strength, hunting prowess, and so on. We see a hierarchical society emerge, with the most powerful male enjoying the attention of their entire society. We see that women are protected and rely on social bonds to wield power and to facilitate child rearing. This is, essentially, the foundation for our patriarchy. But let's continue with the timeline. Tree dwelling is an effective way of avoiding predation. We are among the largest, certainly the most social species that can access the trees, and so we are relatively safe. For the last 3 million years, we have been combining ape-like and bipedal means of moving. We eat primarily fruit and other forage, for which we can descend to the ground, but we are still not optimized for covering distance on the ground or on two legs. Then the trees start to thin. Africa began to turn to grassland, and many of the less versatile species began to disappear. We must travel further and further to find food, often running across the ground. At first, mostly on all fours. We're struggling. We thieve and scavenge for our food, shifting towards meat, but struggling to find it. We are hunted. There are predators here who have been hunting the ground for millions of years, and they are far more adapted than ourselves. Our numbers dwindle, but we are social and we're smart. Our highly social, highly communicative nature has nurtured a big brain. Eventually, we start to crack bone using tools. This seems to be a new age in animal evolution. It unlocks a new cascade of thinking and innovating, and it gives us access to rich bone marrow. The increased nutrients strengthens us, and we finally start to hunt. We develop longer legs and bigger buttocks, letting us run upright for incredible amounts of time. We lose body hair, gaining the ability to sweat, which lets us cool our bodies even while running. Our prey still needs to stop and pant in order to maintain body temperature. We develop the spear, which will be the deadliest weapon for hundreds of thousands of years until the firearm. It is now perhaps 500,000 years ago. give or take a little. Because we have such relatively large heads, childbirth is extremely difficult and dangerous. Because we are such social and intelligent creatures, our development is long and complex. The childhood period of a human's life, in which they are dependent on their parents or community for survival, is extremely long compared to the childhood periods of other animals. This magnifies even more the dramatic difference in gender roles, which we have already seen in our species. Women still invest more resources, more time, and more psychological space into their children. Men must provide for a longer time. The resulting dynamic produces a society in which stable, monogamous relationships are most viable, most likely to produce stable and competent offspring for their species. We've probably had somewhat the same DNA for quite a while, but change is coming very rapidly as we unlock or activate certain genes by making new discoveries, by forming more efficient groups, by feeding our bodies better. We become the most terrifying hunters the world has ever seen, simply running our prey to exhaustion and spearing it at a distance as it struggles for breath. Our bodies begin to select for mobility and intelligence rather than power. Hunting in groups and using tools, there's really no need for the sheer brute strength we see in some of our distant cousins, like the gorilla. Access to regular meat hugely accelerates the development of our brain. We begin controlling fire, cooking. This unlocks further nutrients and eradicates disease, accelerating things yet further. Now it's difficult to say at what point we actually became our species. That's the thing about evolution. No parent is a different species than its child, no child than its grandchild. Evolution is a long, slow process. The gradual elimination of weak genes and the proliferation of strong ones over hundreds of thousands, millions of years. 450,000 years ago, some of our ancestors moved to Europe and became Neanderthals, traditionally noted as a different species. For a while, they seemed like the most promising one, with larger brains and stronger bodies than ourselves. An approaching ice age makes them strong and hardy. They wear furs and begin to show signs of more advanced civilization, like burying the dead and creating abstract art. Things are much worse in Africa. As a terrible dry spell hits, there are few herbivores left to hunt, and humans find themselves reduced to perhaps only 10,000. This is perhaps the moment of highest risk we've seen in all our history. We find ourselves on the coast, scavenging fish and shellfish, barely surviving. Then about 210,000 years ago, we escape Africa to Europe and find ourselves competing with Neanderthals for resources. We're more social than them, however, with large communities and a great ability for long-distance spear throwing. Despite their greater strength and bigger brains, we outlast them, aside from a few with whom we interbreed. It's now around 40,000 years ago. Sometime along the way, we've developed language. We can now pass ideas, however imperfectly, from individual to individual. Our ability to cooperate skyrockets, and thus our ability to specialize. Progress accelerates yet further. It's now been 2.5 to 2.7 million years, something like that. A long time. And we've essentially only developed language, the controlled use of fire, and some very crude tools. Not much for 2.5 million years, huh? But we're now a species that thinks in the abstract, that looks for patterns in reality and communicates them amongst its members. We are burying our dead. We are creating art. We're singing, we're sharing ideas, laying the foundation for what will come to be known as culture. It can be said with certainty now that we are human, though it's difficult to say exactly how far back we'd go to have to pick out an individual generation and say, now that's not human. When we get to 10,000 years ago, we see the earliest continuous settlement, Jericho. We see the domestication of animals, the development of the wheel, the shift towards agriculture. This gives us the ability to support larger communities, to specialize further, to devote more time to extremely powerful activities like thinking, innovation, spiritual and religious leadership. We dominate the land and begin to multiply, to spread, slowly across Asia, and then, 15,000 years ago, North and South America. It is now perhaps 8,000, 7,000 BC. Things begin to accelerate yet further. In a few short thousand years, we see the widespread working of metal, increased mixing of various ethnic groups, the development of writing systems, numerical systems, governmental reforms, and taxes. We see the first system of schooling, official training in logic and rhetoric. We see annotated music, fiction, and team sports. We now have society. Now we're in familiar territory. Fast forward a couple short thousand years, and industrialization begins in the 1800s. And in just 2 centuries, we see massive growth with coal and steam, railroads, the international combustion engine, electricity, nuclear, computers. We go to space. Then in the 1990s, we get internet, and things go absolutely insane. Poverty, starvation, disease, violence, all of these things are already at their lowest points in history, and then they all halved in something like 20 years, depending on your argument. Then they are halved again. In 2019, Britain became the first state to generate more energy from zero-carbon sources than from fossil fuels. More resources are traded digitally in a single day than were generated in centuries, an entire millennia over the course of human history. We have access to all the thoughts of humanity ever recorded at our fingertips. We have instantaneous communication with one another across the entire world. We can fly. Soon, robots will likely take over all our jobs. Poverty will likely be entirely eradicated. In some ways, these things give us incredible efficiency and adaptability. They optimize our survival in a way never before seen in the history of known life. And yet, we feel it's too fast? We feel it's strange? Yes, because we're hunter-gatherers who have suddenly split the atom, have tapped into the electromagnetic spectrum, have found a way to record and share all thoughts instantaneously across time and space. We found ourselves in an age of unimaginable technological capability, and yet we're still motivated by the same tribal primate instincts, the same urge to distinguish in-group and out-group, the same urge to procreate, the same urge to compete. Well, perhaps we can take a serious look at our evolutionary roots. We can try to understand why it is we are motivated as we are, why we look for patterns in the wild, and why we attempt to give the form of meaning with our words, why we share those words, and why we desire to understand and to be understood. We can realize that we aren't biologically designed to be connected to all humanity all at once, all calamity all at once, even all knowledge all at once. Knowledge is priceless, sure, but only if we can use it. Only if we can integrate and understand it. So perhaps in looking at our past, despite all the violence and sexism and racism and anonymity, perhaps we can understand that we come from the same place as all animals, a place of struggling to survive in a world of scarce resources, a place of coming together because that's how we found the way, through sharing knowledge rather than keeping it, through empathizing and protecting one another, relying on one another rather than robbing one another for survival. That's who we are. That's what it is to be human. That's why we have to embrace the past and learn from those who suffered through scarcity to bring us to such abundance.